Welcome to the Event Connection, where we explore the stories, trends, and unforgettable moments that are shaping our industry. We'll uncover the human side of events and celebrate the power of engagement and connection, all while having a little fun. This podcast is produced by PC Nametag.
Welcome to the Event Connection podcast. My name is Megan, and today I'm here with Brooke, and we're going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is event mishaps, specifically on an event that happened recently that had a few blunders that happened. A few might be a little bit of an understatement, but we're excited to talk to you all about what we learned from the event and what you all can take away from it as event planners.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is going to be a fun episode. So we're going to be talking about, like Megan said, a recent event that went wrong in a lot of different ways. And a lot of you may have heard it, especially if you are a TikTok user. I think it was pretty hard to honestly avoid this topic in the last couple weeks. And especially if you're like a fan of books or bookish content on TikTok or event planning. So there's a good chance you might have seen this already. It's also been in the regular news, but people have been calling it the Fire Festival of book conventions. We're not going to be naming this event or anyone involved. Everything so far has been alleged. I don't think there's any reason to disbelieve any of the information that's come out about this event, but we don't want to add to the dog pile that this event organizer has already been kind of suffering through, I'm sure. So even if the blowback kind of is justified, as we'll talk about, we just don't really want to add to that negativity. So I think we're trying to focus more on what went wrong and really picking apart all the different levels of mishaps, like Megan said, that happened during this event, because at kind of every stage of the planning and communication, something went wrong. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn as event planners about how to avoid situations like this. Hopefully, this is an extreme case, but even like the individual situations. So we're going to have some fun because a lot of what happened is pretty funny, but there are important to remember that there's real people who are negatively impacted by situations like this, from vendors and sponsors to the attendees, and I think mostly to the event planners themselves. So there are lessons that can help anyone who plans events or wants to plan events. So that's what we kind of hope you take away from today's episode, but also have a little bit of fun hearing about this little bit of a disaster.
I can kick it off.
Yeah.
So I thought I would give a little bit of a background information on what this event was, if you're unfamiliar with it. So this was a book festival that happened in Baltimore in the beginning of May 2025. So they did have a website for the event, which was good. I was kind of looking at the different tabs that they had. There was general info, there was a schedule, map, speakers, authors. So that's kind of like an overview of what the website had on it. And this is what the event organizer described the event as. So this is the perfect event to make more bookish friends. This event will include a vendor hall, panels, a content creation room, fandom cosplay meetups, and a cosplay competition and a ball. So lots of fun activities. I know I probably would have been interested in going to it if I was in the Baltimore area. So
For sure.
Another interesting thing about this event is that it appeared that the event was put on by an event planning company, but I think the company was only comprised of one person. So I think that kind of led to a little bit of difficulties with, if you're just only one person, one planner, that's a lot to handle when things are going wrong. So we'll keep that in mind. But it sounds great. There were a few controversies that happened around this event, so I'll just give a slight overview. We'll get a little bit more into it as we go throughout this episode, but the planner secured authors and vendors well ahead of time, which was great. But the planner wasn't able to get as many attendees to sign up for the event as they previously thought. We'll get a little bit into that. So you can kind of see where vendors were hoping that there would be more people stopping by their booths and there weren't. We'll get into that. So the result was that this event was very sparsely attended and a little bit of a letdown. There wasn't really a marketing budget or decorations, and the vendors ended up losing a lot of money. So we'll kind of get into that. But I think with each section that we talk about in this podcast, we wanted to touch on some lessons that we can take away from each portion. So I think for me, the lessons that I can take away from this specific section is, planners need support. Sometimes it's hard to do it alone. And even if you are an independent planner, it's okay to lean on your industry peers, lean on your internal team, or you can hire outside vendors to help you fill the gap. Little shameless plug, PC Name Tag can help you with your name tags. That's an example of, if you're a small event team, you don't need to be spending, the last, the night before the event stuffing your event badges. We can do it for you. So little shameless plug for that. So
yeah, definitely. There's a lot of really great vendors in the event planning industry that I think will go above and beyond to make sure planners have an easier time, because we know that it's a very stressful job, as we'll clearly kind of see. So one of the first things you mentioned, the website, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the website, because it really, like you said, the main issue is that they had a bunch of authors and vendors, and they secured all that ahead of time. Everyone showed up, but the attendees did not show up. And I think getting attendees to show up kind of starts with your marketing strategy, which if you're looking for low budget marketing strategies, episode 3 was all about that. So check that out. But that kind of starts all from your website. And I think there were a lot of issues with this website and specifically. So to this day, at least last time I checked, this was a couple days ago, so maybe they changed it since then. But to this day, to my knowledge, the homepage still says schedule coming soon. Obviously, this event happened like a week and a half ago. Additionally, the word schedule is spelled wrong, and the schedule can actually be found on the website. But I have heard, and this is alleged, but there was a couple people who ended up attending the event who said that during the event, the schedule was actually not on the website, and they ended up putting that up during the controversy. So whether or not the schedule is actually available on the website, unsure, but it definitely said schedule coming soon on the homepage. So people didn't know where to look to find information about the programming that was happening at the event. Additionally, there was a section where you could look at all the featured guests that they had, but the font that they used was like impossible to read, and they didn't link any of like the social media profiles for any of the featured guests or anything like that, which I think was a big, I don't know, a kind of a miss, because people didn't necessarily know who these people were. They couldn't read their names, couldn't look up who they were ahead of time, or maybe they really liked someone, went to the website and couldn't figure out who they were. Additionally, there was, like you mentioned, a floor plan on the website, but the floor plan, and we'll talk more about this later, ended up being wrong. So the floor plan on the website and the floor plan that was given to all the vendors and sponsors was not the floor plan that they ended up going with on site. So, and to my knowledge, they did not give out that new floor plan to anyone. Like, they didn't have it drawn up. No one really had access to it. So no one knew exactly how to find these vendors either. And just in general, the website looked fairly sketchy and unprofessional. Like the typos, the grammatical issues, the lack of like imagery, just things like that. It looked like it was kind of slapped together. And as someone who loves books and loves events, like looking at that website wouldn't inspire me to want to purchase a ticket, because I would see that kind of as a red flag. So I think that, it plays a lot into why not that many people ended up signing up and attending. So just some like lessons to take away from this. Number one, it's hard to like keep your website updated, but if nothing else, just make sure that your homepage for sure stays updated. Like always make sure that your schedule, if it's not on the homepage, make sure there's a link that links to your schedule. Even if it's not complete, just say, see what we have so far, see what you can sign up for early. Make sure you have like featured guests featured on the homepage. Like if people spent extra to be a featured guest, or if you have like more popular content creators, make sure they're on the homepage to drive a little bit more excitement. Make sure you have a hotel information and ticket purchase link. They should all be very easy to find. One thing, I actually was looking at this event. It's an anime convention in Chicago. animemagic.org is their website. And I think that their website is like so good. Like I would recommend, especially if you're in the more like entertainment planning side of things, their website is really easy to navigate and very like aesthetically pleasing and easy to use. So check out other people's event websites to attempt to build your own. So that is a word of advice. Also, just make sure you have someone review your website for basic copy and grammar and sentence structure. I know this is close to Megan's heart because
I love grammar and
she
punctuation.
loves grammar.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, but it is important, I think, especially like for a book event. Like these are people who are readers. Like they'll notice those things, and I think anyone would kind of see that as a red flag. But additionally, too, like don't take on too many assets, especially if you have a small team. Like maybe you don't need a website with 30 pages that you have to be in charge of updating. And maybe you don't need to have like an Eventbrite page and a Facebook event page and like a bunch of different social media assets. Like maybe have your website and then an Instagram account so that there's only two things you have to worry about updating. Because I think the more you have, like the more difficult it gets to make sure that everything's updated when you have a new person you signed on or a schedule change or any kind of like conflict. It builds up and it's hard to keep everything up to date. So yeah, those are a couple things I think we can learn from this website situation. But moving on to Meaghan, I think this is really interesting is the ticket tiers. This kind of, another huge issue.
Going back to the event website that you were talking about, I know when I'm on site as an attendee, I use the event website kind of as a go-to resource. So like I'm going to check the next speaker or I'm going to check when lunch is. So I know I tend to reference the website multiple times throughout the event. So it's really good to have that in a great spot. And like Brooke mentioned, maybe you only need 3 tabs or
Right.
maybe you keep it nice and simple, but if you can give attendees all the information that they need right at a glance, that's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So we can talk about the ticket tiers that they featured at this event, which I think was interesting. So there were 3 different ticket tiers that people could purchase in order to attend the event. The first ticket was $50. This got you access to the vendor hall, cosplay meetups, and a 1-day content room, which I thought was a little interesting.
More on that later.
We'll talk a little bit about that because it didn't quite live up to expectations, so stay tuned for that. The second tier was $150, so this added onto level 1 access to panels, a swag bag, and an additional day of the event. And then lastly, if you wanted to go all in, you could pay $250 for access to everything I mentioned, plus a romance ball, which excited a lot of people because since this is a book event, they wanted to get all dressed up in their dresses and, in their cosplay gear and attend this fun activity. So I know there were also opportunities to sponsor the event. So some people were paying several $100s as, authors and sponsors to help support the event. And there were also table fees as well, which I believe was about $150
Yeah, it was $150 for the table fee. And I think the sponsorships ranged from like $100 to $250, which would be additional to the table fee. So like pretty reasonable for table fees, I think. But someone like a sponsor could end up paying about, what is that, $500?
Yeah, it gets
400. 400. I'm bad at math.
No, you don't ask Brooke or I to do math. That's why we do marketing here. Anyways, so taking a look at those ticket tiers, I know it's really important to curate those ticket tiers and really think about what you get as far as each ticket level and really make sure that the sponsorship packages that you offer sponsors are well worth the investment because you want to make sure that they get what they expect out of the event based on the investment that they give to your event. Also, make sure that you deliver on your promises. We'll get a little bit into that within the episode, but a lot of things didn't come true that were promised as part of the ticket levels. So that was a little bit of a bummer for a lot of the attendees. But one tip that Brooke had was to take a look at other similar events, see their ticket pricing strategies, and see if you're kind of on par with that. I know you have attended a recent event that you thought had reasonable ticket pricing. Do you want to talk about that? Yeah,
well, like looking at their tiers, the lowest level, the $50 ticket, really at the end of the day, mostly just got you access to the vendor hall. Like the cosplay meetups, I haven't really heard much about that. It didn't seem like that many people were cosplaying, and I don't know that was a huge draw. And then the content creation room we'll talk about, but that ended up just pretty much being an empty room. So really you were paying $50 just to be able to access the vendor hall. And from my experience, that's very expensive for something like that. Like the event that I was talking about, I attended is called the Oddities and Curiosities Expo. Super fun event. They have like vendors who just sell like weird things made of like animal bones, stuff like that. Very cool event. But it was pretty much that same thing. Like you bought a ticket to have access to the vendor hall, and they had additional events that you could do. Like there was taxidermy classes and stuff, but that was all in addition to the main ticket price. And that price was $10 if you paid ahead of time and $15 if you paid on site. So like super reasonable, like nothing to really complain about there. Cause you're really, paying to enter to like pay more money to buy a bunch of stuff is essentially it. So $50 seems a little steep to me. And I think too, if you're charging $50 just to enter the vendor hall, that kind of takes away from the money someone might have to spend with your vendors then. So that kind of is like a double whammy in that way.
Good to think of.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, like you said, I think just doing research on similar events that are structured the same way and making sure that you're not vastly overcharging or undercharging for what your event actually is, for sure. Next, we want to talk about the venue because this is an interesting one. So this event was held at the Baltimore Convention Center. I believe that it was just in the basement, not the entire convention center. Like it's a venue that can handle multiple events at once. But it sounds like original estimates when some of the vendors were first signing up was that there would be about 1,200 attendees. Like that was their original hope. And I've heard a lot of different people were promised a lot of different numbers in terms of the overall attendees. Some people heard 800. Closer to the event, it sounds like the event organizer was telling vendors that it would be like 500 to 600 people, but that for sure at least 500 people had signed up, which did not end up being the case. Spoiler alert. But the original plan to have 1,200 attendees, that might have filled the space. But clearly with what ended up happening, they had way too big of a space and way too few people. And it just ended up like just looking bad. Like even besides the fact that like not enough people attended this event, even if I think like 300 or 400 people attended, it still would have looked pretty sparsely attended just because of how big of a space they rented for this. And it was just a little bit too big for their britches. So just make sure that you're considering how, especially as a first-time event, what is a reasonable venue? Because convention centers also, I think, are very expensive. I don't know the specifics, but not a cheap venue to rent. So think about, maybe renting like a hotel conference room or like a ballroom or something at a hotel, something that's a little bit smaller, and maybe, too, something that already fits the aesthetic of your event. Like for this one, since it was kind of a romantasy book event, they could have looked maybe into like a ballroom at a hotel that already had kind of like that more elaborate decoration that kind of lent itself more to this group. Whereas a convention center is kind of like a blank canvas that you have to do all the decorations yourself. And that's a lot of extra work and extra money and all these things that you have to consider. So they can be great venues for some events, but I think for this one was not really the best choice. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that leads us to the event registration desk that they had, which I know
near and dear to our hearts.
Yeah, at PC Name Tag, we help event planners make sure that their event registration desks like look really solid and make a great first impression. That's one thing that I tell a lot of planners is you have to remember that your event registration desk is the first impression that attendees get of your event. It's when they walk in the door, they see your smiling faces or your team handing out badges and lanyards, and it's a great way to start your event off on a good note. So this registration desk, I believe, was just a table. I think there was only one sign, so it was a little bit sparse as far as decoration. But one thing that I thought was kind of interesting is that there weren't any event badges for this event. I believe either they were misplaced or they said that they were damaged, but long story short, there were no badges. I think the only thing that they had to identify attendees were wristbands. And the thing about the wristbands is that, one, they weren't able to provide enough wristbands, but all of the wristbands were the same as far as I know. So attendees were wearing the same ones, vendors, panelists, sponsors, they were all wearing the same wristband. So it was hard to differentiate who was supposed to be where and at what level they had purchased for their ticket. So that was a bit rough. But another interesting thing as far as the registration desk is that some attendees were promised a swag bag and they just didn't have the swag bags. I think it was said that the conference center might have thrown away or lost the swag bags, but the conference center allegedly did say that they weren't aware of the swag bags. So I think it was just a
Yeah.
miscommunication, or the swag bags just didn't come together. So I think that was a bit of a letdown because attendees had paid more to have that be a part of their event experience.
Yeah, definitely. I think recently, just like yesterday, maybe the event venue came out and said like they didn't know anything about any swag bags. And being a convention center, I think they're very used to having that sort of thing. I find it hard to believe that they would have just thrown the swag bags away. But yeah, if you look at the pictures, like the registration desk for this event was just very sad. Like even the sign, I think, was a sign that was provided by the convention center. It wasn't something that had any branding on it. It just said like on a white piece of paper, registration here for the book festival. So it was pretty sad, and I think hard for people to even figure out where to go because they didn't have signs up, at least on day one, with arrows pointing to where the registration desk was either. That kind of lent itself to some issues.
Thinking of, some of the lessons I learned from the registration desk specifically is you can create like a really great event registration experience, even if you have a simple registration desk look. You just need to keep it professional, and you can really, dress it up a little bit. Like, for example, at PC Name Tag, we have lanyard stands or badge ribbon display walls. So there's little things that you can add to kind of make it a little bit more professional, or add a table throw. That's a great example of how you can kind of dress it up a little bit. And the other lesson I would take away is to make sure that you are differentiating your attendees. And there's a really easy way to do that. You can buy badge ribbons for the bottom of the badges. So one could say attendee, one could say sponsor, one could say vendor, exhibitor, volunteer. You can kind of get creative with it, but having those be different colors or different titles is a really great way and a cost-effective way to make sure that the people who are supposed to be in the venue or in the vendor hall or in the VIP area are supposed to be there.
For sure. Yeah. We see people do a lot of different things. Sometimes they'll do like a different lanyard design, a totally different badge design for different types of attendees. But I think badge ribbons are like the easiest, most cost-effective way to do it. And it's effective, and people get excited about the ribbons too. And even if you like don't want to have a ribbon wall, you can have just like some custom designs themed after your event, just laying out for people to grab as they come in. I think it's just a really easy way to get people kind of excited from the moment that they walk into your event and get their badge or their wristband or whatever they're grabbing. So
make it an experience, even if it's just something small. And I did want to say, even if you do wristbands, just make them different colors. You can still differentiate attendee types that way as well.
And they don't necessarily have to have like your branding on it. Like you could just get plain Tyvek, wristbands, non-transferable, but just get a couple different colors. They're very, very affordable. So yeah, you don't have to go all out necessarily, but I think there's little ways that you can get people excited and little ways that make it easy to make sure that people are where they're supposed to be. Even like stamps, like hand stamps. I think that's when I went to that Oddities and Curiosities Expo, they just did a stamp on your hand. So things like that. But now we're going to move into, we kind of touched on this, but the overall just miscommunications, especially when it came to the event organizer communicating with the vendors and sponsors, because there was a lot of things that just didn't get communicated correctly or didn't get communicated at all. That led to a lot of issues too. So like I mentioned, the floor plan on the website and the floor plan that was provided to the vendors and sponsors ended up being wrong. So the vendors and sponsors came and everything was like out of order. So they weren't able to really find their booths, and a lot of people had issues because they had maybe, based on the floor plan they were given, planned on being on a corner. So they planned their booth design around that, but then they ended up being like in line because they kind of had it originally set up as like islands of 4 booths, it looked like, but they ended up doing more like of a row style. So most people ended up having like inline booths, I think. So that kind of messed up what they had planned to do with their booths. And then it made it hard for them to figure out where they were supposed to be, for the attendees to figure out where to find the vendors they were looking for. And from what I heard, the reason that they changed the floor plan was something to do with the fire code for the venue. I'm not really sure how that works exactly, but just like a reminder, double, triple check with the venue and make sure that your floor plan that you have planned actually works with the venue. I'm not, again, entirely sure how the fire codes work. Maybe they're different for every venue, but before you go and publish it, just make sure that that's confirmed that your floor plan is A-okay. Additionally, vendors were told that they would have a table and a tablecloth at their booth. And they did have a table, but people never ended up getting tablecloths. And some vendors brought their own tablecloths, so they were fine. But a lot of people were just kind of waiting around at their booth expecting tablecloths to come. And then by the time they realized that the tablecloths were never coming, they were frantically trying to put their booths together really quickly because it was almost time for the exhibit hall to open. And that's just not a great experience for people. And also, tablecloths are important because a lot of people end up, putting all your loose ends, odds and ends under the tablecloth to kind of hide them, make your booth look better, an added level of security so you can make sure all your important stuff is where it's supposed to be. So when you don't have that, it's kind of like, oh, where do I put all my stuff? It kind of throws a wrench into everyone's process. So important to just be sure to communicate what they can actually expect at their booth so they know what to bring themselves. Because a lot of people kind of rely on that. Additionally, Meaghan alluded to this too, but for the people who did sponsor the event, their sponsor terms were, to my knowledge, not honored at all. I know that the $250 sponsorship tier that involved those people were supposed to get their logo on the website. They were supposed to be able to provide items for the VIP bags. They were supposed to have window and or floor decals, their logo on the VIP bags, the tote bags, and social media posts. And some even were supposed to have a social media takeover. None of that happened, I believe. Okay. So these people didn't get their logo on the website. There were no VIP bags, so there were no items that ended up going into the bags and no logos on the bags. There were no floor signage or anything like that, and there were no social media takeovers. So every level of this sponsorship agreement was not followed through on.
It's got to be frustrating as a vendor.
For sure, because that's just money that you're literally just throwing away. Because if you, spent $250, and these are just first-time authors. They're all independent authors. I think that's one thing we didn't really mention. But the people who attended this event are not authors who are super well known. They're not signed by any particular publishing house. Oftentimes, they're spending a lot of money to write their book, pay someone to go through and edit it, paying to have someone design a cover, paying to get their books and then sell them. They often kind of start out behind because they've spent so much money just getting their books published because they don't have a company that's doing it for them. And so $250 can be a lot for a first-time author who's maybe attending their first event. And I think a lot of the people at this event were first-time authors. And so, to feel like you spent $250 to have this kind of special treatment and all this additional promotion, and then just to be treated like every other vendor, which is also not great. Just not a good experience at all. The other thing too is I'm not sure if it was the featured vendors or the featured authors that were more popular or if it was specifically for sponsors, but some people were supposed to have their hotel rooms paid for, and they were supposed to be staying at the Hilton and ended up having to be moved to the Days Inn, which
little different,
little bit of a difference there. No offense to the Days Inn, but when you're expecting the Hilton and being moved there, that can be a little bit jarring too. There were some people complaining about the quality of the rooms at the Days Inn, but apparently the contract with the Hilton fell through. It wasn't being followed up on. So they didn't have the room secured there. And then some people who were supposed to have their rooms paid for ended up having to pay for their own rooms. So that just led to a lot of confusion too, and there wasn't good communication around that. But I think lessons learned here, we talked about this a lot in our last episode, but just be a good sponsor, be a good partner to your sponsors and your vendors. I think I have a couple quotes that I'll mention later on, but a lot of people kind of said they know if you're attending a first time event, it's not going to be perfect. they're kind of like going into it expecting things to fall through the holes. But a lot of people want to support events like that. They want a new event to be successful. So they will sign up to sponsor it, even though they're not quite sure if everything's going to work out the way it's supposed to. But that's why it's so important, even if something's going to go wrong or something's not going to come to fruition the way you thought it was, just be communicative with your sponsors. Just let them know ahead of time. Maybe figure something else out, or say like, I'm so sorry we can't, get this done this year. Next year, I would love to have you come and like waive your fee or whatever. Like, there are so many ways that you can handle these situations with your vendors and sponsors. And I think just open communication about that would have gone so far. But the issue was that like nobody was expecting kind of like the mess that they walked into. Also, double check everything with your venue. Be transparent and communicative. I think managing sponsors is a lot of work, and vendors and panelists and everything. Like we said earlier, they secured all those people like a year and a half in advance of the event. And that's great. They had all these people, but if you're one person planning this event, those are a lot of people to keep track of and make sure that everyone has exactly what they need. Everyone's taken care of and stuff. It's a lot to manage. So maybe don't bite off more than you can chew when it comes to that.
Definitely a lot to handle for just one person.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
So I thought I could talk a little bit about what was going on in the vendor hall, and as far as some of the activities that were going on, I'll just kind of go through these quickly since Brooke has touched on a few of them so far. But the first one was there was a very severe lack of attendance. I know Brooke mentioned there was supposed to be 500 to 600 people. There only ended up being about 80 to 100. I know there's differing numbers, but that's kind of like a big shock if you're expecting this many people to visit your booth and then there aren't that many. And we'll kind of talk about why there weren't as many attendees as expected. I think there just wasn't a lot of event marketing going on that could have helped boost the attendance for this event. Next one was there wasn't really a set in stone agenda. I know Brooke mentioned that there were supposed to be panelists and people were just kind of confused. Where am I supposed to be? When am I going on this panel? Where am I supposed to be? So that was a little bit of a miscommunication with the panelists. The vendor hall was also not locked during lunch, so I know there were a lot of vendors who were a little uncomfortable leaving their booths to go have lunch because they wanted to make sure that all of their merch that they had on their booths was secure while they were going to have lunch. So might want to make sure that you look into security and make sure that vendors are getting a break for lunch, because they deserve a break too. It's a long day to make sure that you're chatting with attendees and selling your merch, and it's just difficult.
Yeah, especially since there weren't badges too. So it was like the exhibit hall wasn't locked, and people didn't have like badges, and some people didn't have wristbands. So it was like anyone could have, in theory, walked in there, and just not a great.
Little bit of a miscommunication there. Another thing that some of the attendees were commenting on is the only refreshments that they had was a cash bar. So I think they were expecting that maybe there would be some treats or drinks or water, and there just wasn't. So that was a little difficult. There weren't too many decorations, just tables and chairs. Apparently some of the panels were there were no chairs provided at the panels. So there were just pictures of people sitting on the ground. So that was a little bit, unprofessional, I guess, and it's just not super ADA accessible if you want to make sure that, people have a place to sit and enjoy the panel activities that you have.
Yeah, one of the TikTokers, her video went pretty viral. She was like pretty noticeably pregnant, and she ended up going to a panel where she had to sit on the floor
That's tough.
Like a 6-month pregnant woman.
Yeah, I think just in general, making sure that you have a lot of seating at your event is essential, because it's just tough seeing attendees, even just during the lunch period, sitting on the ground, doing their, things on their laptop. It's just good to make sure that you have plenty of seating. There weren't any goodie bags. That was a little bit difficult. I know this was promised as part of the ticket tiers, but that just didn't happen. This was interesting. There was a little bit of a miscommunication whether it's a family-friendly event or a not family-friendly event. And so there were vendors that were selling some more adult-geared merchandise, and then there were vendors that were selling more family-friendly merchandise. And I believe that there might have been some younger audience members here as far as attendees. So that was a little bit of a miscommunication. You want to make sure that what, young people are being exposed to is appropriate for the event. So that was a little difficult. And the last one is wasn't the content creation room that they had mentioned. So that was a little difficult. I know some people were looking forward to taking advantage of that. And that was part of the tier 1 ticket level. So that was a big part of the $50 that people
for sure
spent.
And from what I heard, on day 1 the content creation room was open, but it was just an empty room. And then day 2 they ended up just closing it completely because of like technical difficulties. So those people only came on day 2, like didn't even if they wanted to for some reason use this empty room, like they couldn't even do that because of the technical difficulties. And that's like one of the 3 things that's on your tier 1 offerings. It's kind of like a big deal. Like you said, and I'm not really sure what a content creation room is, to be honest, but
yeah, it could have been cool to have maybe like some photo spots or maybe some backgrounds that you could take TikTok videos and post about the event. So there could have been some cool opportunities with that, but just a few lessons I would personally take away from this portion of our podcast is make sure that you're boosting attendance by advertising the event locally. I think that's a good place to start. I know there were some bookstores in the area that would have loved to promote this event, but they hadn't heard about it. So that's a really great way to make sure that the people in the surrounding area of the event are notified and, help garner attendance that way. Make sure you have built-in breaks for vendors. They're people too. They deserve a lunch. They deserve breaks. They want to take a breather. And if you need to lock up the vendor hall, that's great. Making sure that you're having refreshments and snacks, that's always helpful. At least water, that's great. You don't have to have plastic water bottles. You can always have, jugs that people can refill their water bottles from. I know a lot of venues have water fountains that people can fill up their own water bottles, so that's great. I would recommend renting decorations. It's not only better for the planet, but it's also pretty cost effective. So you can really create that vibe of your event on a budget. So that was a little bit of a misstep here. I think if there could have been a little bit more of maybe like pipe and drape or plants on the tables or something like a little bit more glitzy and glamoury, it might have just stepped the event up a little bit more. And then lastly, make sure you have adequate seating. It's just goodwill for your attendees, especially those who definitely need a seat.
Yeah, definitely. That goes a long way. So something we have not really talked about yet that is kind of the reason that this event blew up on TikTok to begin with is the romance ball. So Meaghan talked about the tiers at the beginning of the episode, but so the romance ball essentially cost $100 because from the tier 2 ticket, which was $150, to the tier 3 ticket, which was $250, that was the only additional thing that people got access to. So essentially they were paying $100 extra just to be able to attend this fantasy ball, which I think was on during the evening of the second day of the event. And this was kind of like comedically poorly planned. There were... The videos kind of show it, but there were no decorations whatsoever. There was no like lighting. It was just like think of your typical convention center, like concrete floors, blank white walls, like fluorescent lighting. Like that's what it looked like. There were a couple tables set up, and the tables had like a scattering of fake rose petals on them, but otherwise, like all the lights were on. And it did not really have like a ball feel to it at all. Everyone was standing on like the concrete. And everyone was dressed like very nice. Like people came, they were clearly very excited to attend this ball. They looked great. They looked like, your fantasy characters and stuff, elves and whatnot. But the main thing, the thing that kind of, I think is like the quintessential telltale sign of this event, there was no DJ. And I've heard a couple different accounts of what may have happened. Some people said that the organizer had said they did hire a DJ, but they pulled out at the last minute. There was some speculation about maybe they pulled out because they hadn't been paid, but I've seen no confirmation about that. Someone else mentioned that they were told the DJ may have gotten sick. If that was the case, I think any DJ has a contingency plan for that. Like if they're sick, they have a backup. Like that's always been my experience. So I'm not sure that seems like that probably wasn't the case. I'm assuming that either there was no DJ booked or the DJ ended up pulling out at the last minute. But there was no contingency plan on the part of the event organizer for if that were to happen. So there was no music until one of the security guards for the convention center actually like felt bad for this group, and he, I think, went home and got his own Bluetooth speaker, like a little JBL Bluetooth speaker, and brought it back so that they could at least have music. And it was just sitting on like a plastic chair in the corner. Very like comedic, just the imagery of it, but just kind of crazy to think that there wasn't even like, they didn't even really plan to have like some kind of stereo system in the case that the DJ didn't show up or something went wrong. Because that is probably the most important thing for a ball, is to have some kind of music. And again, they paid $100 for this. There were snacks. I think there were desserts, but that just desserts, no other snacks at this. And then they had a cash bar again at the ball as well. So they didn't have any like built-in like drink tickets or anything like that either. So yeah, that the ball was a little bit of a disaster, and people were really disappointed in it, because that's kind of one of the main things I think people look forward to when it comes to these like fantasy book events, because that's just kind of like part of the experience. There's a lot of events like that have really fun balls. So just a couple lessons learned from this whole situation: make sure you're working with reputable services, because in the event that the DJ did pull out at the last minute, that's not a very professional DJ then. So just make sure that you're double checking and making sure that you're working with people who have done events before and have good reviews. Always have a contingency plan just in case, especially when it's something as big as this like romance ball is for this event. Make sure that you at least have a little boombox to set up, something like that. And again, don't overcharge for an event if you can't deliver on it. If you know that this event is going to go terribly, let people know ahead of time. Say that the ball is canceled and you're going to refund people. And it's better to like let them know that you're canceling something than to have them show up and then massively underdeliver on it, I think, in almost any circumstance. So yeah, that's about that.
I know of an event planner. This is a separate event, but his entertainment that he had scheduled just couldn't make it. So that's a great example of, oh my goodness, the entertainment is not going to happen. What can we do? So they ended up having all the attendees go to a karaoke bar nearby, and everyone loved it. They had a great time. So even if something's not going to go right, if you think on your feet and think of something or have something in place that attendees can do in place of that, you can still have a great experience. And attendees loved it. They still raved about it after the event, and they said it was honestly one of the favorite parts of the experience. So
right.
I just never know.
Yeah, that's very true. I would love that. That sounds like a blast.
So I know there was an apology video that happened. So the event planner, bless her, she's doing all this by herself. A lot of things were going wrong, and I think she just got overwhelmed. But she did do an apology video that she posted online. She just said, I apologize that the ball didn't go the way that you all wanted it to. Please contact me and I will issue a refund immediately. So at least there was, some sort of communication with that. But it was only really the ball that was addressed. I know a lot of other things also didn't quite go as well as she had planned. So I think my biggest takeaway from this is to make sure that you have a PR plan in place. It's super important, especially if things go sideways, and make sure you have that working agenda. You might also hear it called like an event Bible, a program outline, or event specs. So this is something that you can't put too much detail into, making sure that everything is covered, especially if things aren't going quite the way that you thought that they would. And then the venues version of that is called the banquet event order. So that's the difference between those two.
Yeah. Definitely.
So I thought you could talk a little bit about the ultimate fallout that kind of happened towards the end of the event.
For sure. So obviously, like we said at the beginning, this really blew up on social media. There were also like articles on like CNN. Like it was a pretty big deal, and I do honestly feel bad for the event planner in that way, because it was a fairly small event, and the backlash really built into this like crazy huge thing. And again, like it's understandable why people were so upset, but it's just kind of crazy to see like how big something can get when people are so unhappy. And I just wanted to read a couple of the quotes that were on, I believe it was the event's Facebook page, because I think they're very telling. So one person who was a vendor, and this is a little bit paraphrased. This is mostly like exactly what they said, but I cut out a couple things. They said, "I will no longer be attending any events in their first year. I'm no longer willing to be the financial guinea pig for first-time events. The way the U.S. economy is headed, I'm not willing to risk it. This isn't the first event I've attended that has had horrible communication, but it is the first event where poor communication costs vendors hundreds of thousands of dollars. Con hosts, stop sending important information out via Facebook or Discord or social media. If you aren't communicating via email, that's a huge red flag." So I just think that's very telling because like clearly this person had such a bad experience that they're not even willing to participate in other first time events. And that, so just showing like the ripple effect one negative experience can have that impacts other people who are maybe trying to start their own new events, and how important it is to just make sure that you're creating a good experience for these vendors, these authors, whoever is attending your event. And if you can't, just communicating about it and making it right with them. Additionally, like they said, make sure that you're communicating via email. Like not everyone uses Facebook, not everyone uses Discord. Make sure like email, I think is like the one, or text message, I think would be the one thing that everyone, is comfortable and like used to using. So any important communication should go via one of those channels. Another quote from a vendor who ended up losing a lot of money. They said, "I'm out the cost of books, the table fee, 2 nights in a hotel. I sold 4 books over the course of 2 days. We were told 500 people had registered. I knew it was its first year and it likely wouldn't go 100% the way it should, but I expected normal convention things, badges, signage, a printed schedule, a sign-in process, things like that." So again, people I think are a lot more willing to understand when it's a first time event that things are going to go wrong, but those like core things are just expectations. Like the core, I think like just competencies of an event are still expected no matter what. But yeah, and maybe I know you can talk a little bit more about like the other losses that people kind of experience because of this.
It was just tough seeing some of the authors struggling because some people took PTO, some people found childcare for their kids. They were paying for flights. They were paying to ship their booth set up.
Heavy
So
books are heavy to ship.
Yeah, definitely. So there were a lot of investments that people put into this event, but as of right now, there are refunds that are going to go out allegedly towards the end of May. So we'll see how that goes.
For sure. Yeah. Want to like kind of leave on a more positive note though, because it is sad to hear about how some of these people were impacted, especially because a lot of them are first-time authors. Maybe this was the first event that they did. But I think that there are still some positives. So people ended up making their own fun. I think like despite everything, a lot of the people who attended said they were able to make their own fun and bond with people kind of through their struggles that they were like kind of commiserating with. People were like sharing their tablecloths if they had extra tablecloths. They were kind of like goofing around. And even though the ball wasn't what they expected, they ended up meeting a lot of new people, making new friends, making friends with the attendees who did end up showing up. And I think that's really important. And a lot of some of the more like seasoned authors also made sure to like share the social media accounts of like the first time authors who were attending and make sure that because the seasoned authors weren't going to be as like severely impacted by this, or like local authors too. So they try to make sure that they were kind of shouting about some of the other people who were in attendance. Yeah, I think on TikTok.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things that came out of this event is just the TikTok visibility. I think this is great for up and coming authors that even though this event didn't quite go the way that everyone expected, these, small time authors got a lot of great coverage and people have been very supportive of them and checking out their books. And I think TikTok can be a great asset when, there's positive PR. So I'm really happy that a lot of these authors are getting good coverage.
For sure. Yeah. And it's lucky that happened, I think, because there's a lot of events that go like massively wrong where that doesn't happen, right? Like this is kind of a unique instance where it blew up so much that, people were getting eyes on their content because of like how much of a disaster and how much of how much people were kind of keeping up with it. But yeah, it is a good thing. And I also wanted to mention there is a website, indieauthorconnect.com. You can also go there, and they have all the different authors from this event listed out, so you can go check out their work or check out their website, their social media accounts. So if you are interested in reading and fantasy and romantasy especially, maybe go check out their work. I'm sure there's really talented people. But the bottom line, really, events are places where people connect, I think, even in the worst of times. And that's why they're so important, is because like that in-person connection is just so different from anything else that we experience. And even if everyone is having kind of a bad time, like you can kind of look at it in retrospect and think of the positives that came out of it and the memories that came out of it regardless. Even in some of like the historical like event disasters, like think about like Fire Festival and DashCon and that like weird Willy Wonka event that happened last year. Like you kind of look back at those and think, like, especially if you attended one, like that you have that story, it's just it's events are cool, regardless. And people are, I think, very adaptable and understanding, especially when issues come up. If they can see that you're trying and that you're being communicative, I think people are super, generally speaking. I'm sure there's people who are maybe not as much like that, but most people are very understanding and just need to be talked to and communicated with.
To add to that, I love that all the sponsors were super excited to get the word out about this event. So that's one thing that I would probably take away from this experience is your sponsors want to promote your event. They want to see it do well. So I would suggest making it as easy as possible for them to spread the word and get really excited about the event.
Yeah, for sure. I think the main takeaway here is event planning is hard.
Yeah,
and,
very hard.
And you can't do it alone. Make sure that you're asking for help and admitting when you're in over your head. I think that goes a long way. Instead of panicking, learn from your mistakes, learn from the mistakes of others. Clearly, that's kind of why we wanted to talk about this, is because you can learn from the mistakes that other people may have made that now you don't have to make in the future because you'll be better prepared. And always have a backup method to prevent issues from happening. But yeah.
I would say, things are bound to go wrong. You could have every contingency plan in place possible, and something weird could happen. So plan ahead, but also accept that mistakes are bound to happen, and it's okay. You just got to say, hey, we're going to learn from this, and don't worry, we're going to figure it out, and just go from there.
Yeah, I think that kind of sums it up. That covers the whole story of this event. Hopefully, you learned a little bit, or at least had a little bit of fun hearing about how this went and what's going on now. But yeah, if you have any ideas for future episodes, if there's other event snafus you want us to talk about, anything like that, any episode ideas, anything you want to chat about, we do have an email address now. It's eventconnection@pcnametake.com. So let us know. We're still new. We want to hear what you guys think. So talk to us.
I'm also curious if you've had any big event mishaps that have happened.
Yeah.
Let us know. We'd love to read your stories.
That would be fun. That'd be a fun episode. Definitely do that. But yeah, that's all for today. Tune in next time.